The Harrison family reunion was in full swing at my uncle's sprawling Hampton estate, with old money mingling with new money, all of them competing to prove who had the most of it. I adjusted my simple linen dress, actually a handmade piece from a small Italian atelier, though they'd all assume it was off the rack, and watched my cousins parade around in their logoed designer wear. "Oh, look who finally made it," my cousin Tyler's voice carried across the manicured lawn. Our little social worker decided to grace us with her presence. I touched the vintage Cartier watch on my wrist, my grandmother's final gift before she passed, and checked the time. In exactly 42 minutes, their perfectly orchestrated display of wealth would be completely overshadowed. "Still driving that ancient Volvo, Madeline?" My cousin Ashley chimed in, gesturing toward the parking area with her champagne glass. "We have a great charity that donates cars to the needy." I could put in a word. If they only knew that my ancient Volvo was just for show, while my real car collection sat in a climate-controlled garage across town. Or that the great charity Ashley mentioned had actually received substantial funding from my own foundation, the mysterious Winter Foundation that had been transforming the city's social services landscape. "The Volvo runs fine," I replied quietly, accepting a glass of champagne that probably cost less than the water I donated to local shelters. "How's the charity board treating you, Ashley?" "Magnificent," she preened. "We just approved a small grant to some homeless shelter. $10,000, quite generous really." I hid my smile behind my glass, thinking about the $10 million my foundation had anonymously donated to that same shelter last week. The new facility would be announced tonight, right in the middle of this family gathering of competitive philanthropy. "Still working with those underprivileged children?" my Aunt Margaret asked, her voice dripping with what she probably thought was compassion. "So noble of you to sacrifice a real career for charity work." If she only knew that my sacrifice had led to creating one of the largest private foundations in the country, with assets exceeding most of their combined net worth. "Someone has to do it," I murmured, watching as my Uncle Robert prepared to make his annual announcement about his latest charitable donation. He'd been bragging all afternoon about his $1 million gift to the city hospital. "Did you hear about the hospital's new wing?" Tyler asked the gathering crowd, straightening his Gucci tie. "Uncle Robert's donation is making quite a splash. Front page news tomorrow, they say." I checked my phone discreetly, seeing a message from my foundation's CEO. "Press release ready for 7 p.m. Hospital board standing by. Your family still doesn't suspect anything." $1 million is quite impressive," Ashley added, looking directly at me. "But I suppose that's hard to comprehend on a social worker's salary." I slipped my phone back into my handmade leather clutch, another detail they'd dismiss as cheap, and watched the sun begin to set over the Hampton estate. In 30 minutes they'd learn what truly impressive philanthropy looked like. "Speaking of salaries," Tyler continued, never one to let a chance for mockery pass, "how do you even afford to live in the city on what they pay you? Government work, isn't it?" "Non-profit," I corrected softly, thinking about my real office, not the small desk at the community center where I still worked 3 days a week, but my private floor in the city's most exclusive business district. "Same thing," he laughed. "No profit, no future, no proper clothes." He gestured at my dress with obvious disdain. The family gathered closer as Uncle Robert approached the small stage set up on the lawn. Every reunion included his moment of philanthropic grandstanding, the wealthy businessman showing off his generous spirit. "Maybe next year you can sit on one of our charity boards," Ashley offered with false kindness. "We always need people who understand they." She paused delicately, less fortunate. I thought about the board meetings I'd sat through that morning, not as a charity case, but as the founder of the Winter Foundation, approving grants larger than their annual incomes. "Ladies and gentlemen," Uncle Robert's voice boomed across the lawn. "As you know, our family has always believed in giving back." I checked my watch again. 15 minutes until the announcement. 15 minutes until they learned that while they were mocking my modest lifestyle, I had been quietly building one of the most influential philanthropic organizations in the country. The catering staff, actually undercover members of my foundation's research team, moved efficiently through the crowd, filling glasses and gathering intelligence on the family's various charitable interests. I'd learned long ago that the best way to understand true character was to watch how people treated those they thought couldn't benefit them. To the new Harrison Wing at City Hospital. Uncle Robert raised his glass, his voice swelling with pride over his $1 million donation. I raised my glass too, knowing that in exactly 12 minutes, his grand gesture would be completely eclipsed by an anonymous $100 million donation from the Winter Foundation from me. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about showing your wealth. Sometimes it's about showing your worth. At precisely 7 p.m., as Uncle Robert was still basking in the applause for his hospital donation, the large outdoor TV screens he'd installed to show off his wealth suddenly cut to breaking news. The synchronized sound of phone notifications rippled through the crowd like a wave of impending chaos. Breaking news. Anonymous Winter Foundation donates historic $100 million to City Hospital System. The champagne in Ashley's glass sloshed as her hand trembled. Tyler, mid-boast about his father's generosity, stopped speaking so abruptly he nearly choked. Uncle Robert's face, flushed with pride moments ago, now matched the pale shade of his expensive linen suit. 100 million? Aunt Margaret whispered, clutching her pearls. But who would? The Winter Foundation has announced the largest single donation in the city's history, the news anchor continued, her voice crystal clear in the suddenly silent garden. This unprecedented gift will not only fund the previously announced Harrison Wing but will also establish 5 new community health centers in underserved neighborhoods. I watched as Uncle Robert fumbled for his phone, probably calling the hospital board to understand how his moment of glory had been so thoroughly overshadowed. The same board that had met with me as the anonymous founder of the Winter Foundation, just hours earlier. "This has to be a mistake," Tyler announced loudly, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. "Who has that kind of money to just give away?" The Winter Foundation has been a mysterious force in philanthropy for the past 5 years, the news continued as if answering his question. Their innovative approach to social change has transformed numerous communities, though the founder remains anonymous. My phone buzzed quietly, a message from my CO, hospital board releasing full plans now. Your uncle's wing will become part of the larger Winter Health Network. His name will be on one corridor. One corridor? Uncle Robert's voice cracked as he read the same information on his phone. But they promised me. Actually, I spoke up, my quiet voice somehow carrying across the stunned gathering. The corridor will be named after the community health worker who spent 40 years serving that neighborhood. Your donation will be acknowledged on a nice plaque. All eyes turned to me, confusion mixing with the first hints of dawning realization. How would you know that? Ashley demanded, her perfectly arranged features creasing with suspicion. I pulled out my foundation's leather portfolio, hand-tooled with a subtle winter snowflake pattern. Because I approved the plans this morning. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the fountains in Uncle Robert's garden seemed to pause. You. Tyler laughed, but it sounded forced. The social worker who can't afford a proper suit? Who said I can't afford one? I replied calmly, opening the portfolio. I choose to wear what I wear. Just like I choose to drive a Volvo. Just like I chose to create the Winter Foundation while all of you were busy competing over who could get their name on the biggest building. That's impossible, Aunt Margaret stuttered. You work at a community center. Yes, I nodded, 3 days a week. Because unlike some people, I believe in understanding the communities I serve. The other 4 days I run one of the largest private foundations in the country. I stood up, smoothing down my handmade linen dress. Would you like to know what else the Winter Foundation owns? The shelter network Ashley thinks she's helping with her $10,000 grants? The youth program Tyler mocked last year as throwaway money? The education initiative Aunt Margaret called a waste of resources. The screens behind me filled with images of the Foundation's work, state-of-the-art facilities, innovative programs, transformative initiatives that had changed thousands of lives. While you were all focused on getting your names on buildings, I continued, I was building something that actually matters. Something that changes lives instead of just stroking egos. The sunset over the Hampton estate painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, a stark contrast to the increasingly pale faces of my family members. Uncle Robert had collapsed into his premium outdoor lounger, his $1 million donation now seeming like pocket change in comparison to what his poor niece had just given away. But the resources required, he stammered. The connections needed. You mean like the connections you all bragged about at every family gathering? I asked, pulling up more documents on my tablet. While you were networking at country clubs, I was building relationships with community leaders, understanding real needs, creating actual change. The screens around the garden now displayed the Winter Foundation's complete portfolio, billions in assets, hundreds of successful initiatives, and a global reach that made their local charity boards look like child's play. Those private school scholarships you're so proud of, Ashley? I continued, turning to my cousin. The Winter Foundation funds thousands of them through our education initiative. That homeless shelter you gave $10,000 to? We've built 30 more just like it across the country. Ashley's designer clutch slipped from her fingers, hitting the manicured lawn with a soft thud. But you never said anything. All these years. Would you have listened? I asked quietly. When I tried to discuss systematic change at last year's reunion, you told me to leave the big picture to people who understand money. My phone buzzed again, more breaking news alerts. The Winter Foundation's donation was already making waves across social media. Hashtags about anonymous philanthropy and meaningful change were trending. Ms. Winter. My assistant's voice came through my earpiece using my foundation's name. The mayor is requesting a meeting to discuss the community health centers. And the hospital board has announced an emergency session to revise the naming rights agreements. Speaking of naming rights, I turned to Uncle Robert. I believe we need to discuss the Harrison wing. My foundation's architects have some suggestions for integrating it more effectively into the larger community health network. Your foundation, he repeated weakly. All this time. Yes, Uncle Robert. All this time while you were teaching your children that success means having the biggest house or the most expensive car, I was building something that will outlast all of those things. I walked to the bar and picked up a crystal glass, baccarat, though for once no one was bragging about its price tag. Would anyone like to know why I called it the Winter Foundation? Tyler, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, found his voice. Because you're cold as winter? He attempted his usual sarcasm, but it fell flat. No, I smiled, thinking of my grandmother. Because my grandmother always told me that winter reveals true character. It shows who's prepared, who's resilient, and most importantly, who's willing to help others through the cold. I projected one final image onto the screens, a photo of my grandmother volunteering at the same community center where I now worked. She left me her watch and a choice. I could spend my life proving my worth to this family, or I could prove my worth to the world. The watch, Ashley whispered, finally recognizing the Cartier on my wrist. We all thought it was a replica. Just like you thought my work was small, my clothes were cheap, and my life was unsuccessful, I noted. It's amazing what people see when they're only looking at surfaces. The catering staff, my undercover research team, had begun distributing folders to the stunned family members. These contain information about the Winter Foundation's next phase of initiatives. Since you're all so interested in philanthropy, I thought you might want to see what real impact looks like. There's billions here, Aunt Margaret gasped, flipping through the pages. Schools, hospitals, housing developments. All funded without needing a single building named after me, I confirmed. Though I particularly enjoyed the time you all criticized the new Winter Community Center as architecturally uninspired, at last year's charity gala, I believe. My phone buzzed again. The hospital board was requesting an immediate meeting with the Winter Foundation's founder. The irony of Uncle Robert's $1 million donation being overshadowed so completely wasn't lost on anyone. The car collection you mocked me for not having? I continued, enjoying the way Tyler shifted uncomfortably. It's in a private garage along with the private jet you never knew about. The cheap clothes you love to criticize? Custom made by artisans I support through our Global Crafts initiative. Why reveal yourself now? Tyler asked, his arrogance finally cracking. Why not just stay anonymous? I walked to the edge of the garden, looking out over the property that had hosted so many displays of wealth and status over the years. Because sometimes the biggest impact comes from showing people that their assumptions about success, about worth, about making a difference, they're all wrong. The screens now showed live feeds from the communities the Winter Foundation had helped, thriving neighborhoods, educated children, healthy families. Real success stories that had nothing to do with naming rights or social status. The foundation is announcing its next phase of initiatives tomorrow, I informed them. $10 billion in new commitments to global health and education. I'd invite you all to the press conference, but I smiled slightly. I believe you have a charity board meeting to attend? Something about a $10,000 grant. Ashley flushed deep red, her designer makeup unable to hide her embarrassment. The same Ashley who had offered to donate a car to her poor cousin just hours ago. However, I continued, if any of you are interested in learning about real philanthropic impact, my door is always open. Though, I glanced at my grandmother's watch, you'll have to schedule through my foundation office. I'm rather busy these days. As if on cue, a helicopter appeared overhead, my transportation to an emergency meeting with the hospital board. The same board that had kowtowed to Uncle Robert's $1 million donation now awaited the real power in the room. One last thing, I said, turning back to my shell-shocked family. Grandmother left me a letter with this watch. She said, true wealth isn't in what you have, it's in what you give. I've spent the last decade proving her right. The helicopter landed on Uncle Robert's prized lawn, its winds scattering the papers containing evidence of my success across the perfectly manicured grass. Rather fitting, I thought, watching their carefully constructed notions of wealth and status being blown away by the winds of real change. The Winter Foundation welcomes all sincere partners in making a difference. I called over the helicopter's noise. When you're ready to focus on impact rather than recognition, you know where to find me. As I boarded the helicopter, I caught one last glimpse of my family, still standing in their designer clothes, clutching their expensive champagne, watching as the relative they'd dismissed as poor rose above their Hampton estate in more ways than one. Sometimes the best revenge isn't in showing people how much you're worth. It's in showing them what true worth really means. And as the estate grew smaller below me, I touched my grandmother's watch and smiled. Winter might reveal true character, but it also brings the promise of new beginnings. Perhaps my family would finally learn that the greatest wealth isn't in what you possess, but in what you choose to give away.